They told us it was impossible, that Africa couldn't build without begging. For decades, leaders from Washington to Brussels insisted that nations like Burkina Faso were too poor, too fragile, too broken to stand on their own. They said we needed their money, their guidance, their control. But today, a small landlocked country in West Africa just proved them all wrong. Not with protests or weapons, but with water. Burkina Faso has completed a 78-kilometre canal, entirely without foreign aid, without the IMF, without USAID, without a single cent from the European Union. This isn't just a feat of engineering, it's a revolution in thinking. It's the spirit of Thomas Sankara resurrected. It's the voice of Ibrahim Traoré rising. And it's the future of Africa being dug, not dictated. If you believe the awakening of Africa has begun, stay with us, hit that subscribe button, and let's walk together through this incredible story. Because what just happened in Burkina Faso could change everything. In the heart of West Africa, far from the marble halls of Washington or Brussels, Burkina Faso has quietly accomplished what many called a fantasy. On July 2025, after years of setback skepticism and silent resistance from powerful institutions, the country inaugurated the Thomas Sankara Canal, a 78-kilometre engineering marvel that stretches from the Bagre Dam in the north to the fertile southern regions near Ouagadougou, the capital. This canal was not funded by the IMF. No USAID money. No EU infrastructure grants. In fact, no foreign loan or technical oversight of any kind. Every blueprint, every trench, every calculation, handled by Burkinabe engineers. It was built entirely using local labor, local materials, and national will. The project, which cost approximately $43 million, is the first of its kind in the region to be completed outside the sphere of Western financial control. And it wasn't an overnight success. The original idea was drafted as far back as 2003. But for almost 2 decades, it languished in political purgatory. That all changed after President Ibrahim Traoré's administration took power in 2020, vowing to reclaim Burkina Faso's future with Burkinabe hands. The canal draws water from the White Volta River system, carried through the Bagre Dam, one of Africa's largest earth-filled dams, and now reaches lands that were once barren and bone dry. This means not only water for irrigation, but also livelihoods for farmers, hope for youth, and sovereignty for a nation that refuses to be tethered to debt. At the inauguration ceremony, alongside President Traoré, stood regional leaders and even international observers, notably the President of Togo and Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, whose attendance turned heads across diplomatic circles. Their presence was more than symbolic. It was a recognition that Burkina Faso had done something extraordinary. But this was more than just an engineering feat. It was a statement to the world. Burkina Faso didn't just finish a canal. It cracked the foundations of a global system that for decades told Africa, "You can't succeed without us." At the inauguration, President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the podium and delivered a speech that reverberated far beyond the borders of West Africa. His words weren't just celebratory, they were revolutionary. We refused to be colonized by debt and dependency. We did not need the IMF. We did not need USAID. We needed belief in ourselves. That declaration struck a nerve. Within hours, global economic observers and political analysts began to take notice. How could one of the poorest countries on Earth, landlocked, crisis-stricken, and under constant threat from insurgents, pull off a $43 million infrastructure project without touching a single Western loan? The answer was buried not in numbers, but in narrative. What Burkina Faso proved is that financial independence is not only possible, It's political dynamite. Western institutions like the IMF and World Bank have long operated under the belief that Africa's development must be guided, or rather controlled, through structured aid oversight and conditional assistance. But Traoré's speech disrupted that doctrine in one clean stroke. International media outlets responded cautiously. Some barely covered the event. Others, like Le Monde and Al Jazeera, gave modest attention, but steered away from deeper analysis, perhaps wary of encouraging other nations to follow suit. Inside West Africa, however, the impact was immediate. Leaders in Mali, Guinea, and Niger, countries also led by young military reformers, reportedly praised the achievement in private diplomatic channels. Social media across Francophone Africa lit up with videos of the Canal nationalist anthems and hashtags like Burkina Rising and No Tomv trending in regional circles. This wasn't just a canal anymore, it was a blueprint for rebellion. Not of violence, but of vision. And just as quickly, the world began to wonder what happens if more nations start saying no. What stunned the international community most wasn't the canal itself. It was the silence Traoré broke. For years, African governments had quietly grumbled behind closed doors about the burden of development aid, the conditions, the oversight. The consultants flown in from Europe who never stepped foot in a rice field, yet dictated entire agricultural policies. But few dared say it aloud. Ibrahim Traoré just said it all, and he did it not with outrage, but with achievement that terrified the establishment. In Washington, analysts at think tanks like the Atlantic Council and Brookings began to release guarded reports, suggesting that Burkina Faso's model was unsustainable or high risk. They warned of potential long-term inefficiencies or the dangers of bypassing global best practices. But the subtext was unmistakable. Burkina Faso just broke the rules. And worse, it succeeded. Meanwhile, in European capitals, the tone was even more cautious. Quiet meetings were held within the European External Action Service, EEAS, to reassess development strategy in the Sahel. How could the EU remain relevant if African nations began walking away from its aid frameworks? Even more concerning to them, the people loved it. Citizens across Africa saw in this canal not just a trench of water, but a road to dignity. Videos of young Burkinabe engineers in muddy boots went viral. Grandmothers in rural villages cried as the first streams of water reached their parched fields. Farmers danced in celebration, holding up signs that read, "We built this, not them." And that's the shift Western powers fear most. Not rebellion, but belief. Because once belief spreads, it cannot be bombed. It cannot be sanctioned. It cannot be bought back. So when Burkina Faso dug this canal, it also dug a line in the sand between the past Africa they controlled and the new Africa they don't. In Burkina Faso, water is life. And for too long, life has been uncertain. The Sahel region, dry, unpredictable, and unforgiving, has forced generations of Burkinabe farmers to gamble each season. Will the rains come? Will the crops survive? Will the children eat? But today, for the first time in decades, the answer is no longer left to chance. The Thomas Sankara Canal is delivering more than water. It's delivering freedom. Since its completion, over 35,000 hectares of land have become irrigable. For families who once relied solely on rainfall, they now have a stable agricultural cycle, enabling year-round planting, food security, and even export potential. The rice fields near Ouagadougou are already reporting a 40% yield increase compared to the previous dry season. Jobs are surging. Thousands of laborers who worked on canal construction have now transitioned into roles as maintenance workers, irrigation technicians, or field supervisors. For youth who once considered migration or even joining militias out of desperation, there's now an option rooted in dignity and purpose. In the villages surrounding the canal, the transformation is visible. New schools are being built with local materials. Clinics now receive steady water flow and sanitation support. Women who bear the brunt of rural hardship are forming agricultural cooperatives to produce vegetables, cotton, and dairy, all tied to canal-fed systems. But perhaps the most profound shift isn't economic, it's psychological. For the first time in my life, said a 60-year-old farmer in Zinyare, I feel like my country sees me, like we matter. That sentiment is echoed across towns and rural communities. Traoré's administration is riding a wave of genuine support, not manufactured loyalty. His decision to invest in local engineers, farmers and planners instead of foreign firms has restored something long missing in Burkina Faso's political identity: trust. This canal didn't just irrigate crops, it irrigated faith. The canal may be a physical structure, but its real power lies in what it has done to the soul of Burkina Faso. Before the project, political conversations in Ouagadougou often revolved around frustration, fatigue, and fear. Corruption scandals, fragile coalitions, and the looming presence of international lenders had eroded public confidence. The state seemed distant. Institutions felt hollow. Many believed that Burkina Faso's sovereignty existed only on paper. But when the first waters flowed through the Thomas Sankara Canal, something shifted in the national psyche. Suddenly, politics wasn't about speeches, it was about proof. President Ibrahim Traoré, once seen as just another military figure, is now viewed by many as a legitimate nation builder. His refusal to bow to IMF, pressure his investment in local talent, and his focus on practical development over foreign diplomacy have elevated him to a rare status in African politics, respected and feared at home and abroad. Traoré isn't asking for legitimacy from the West, said a university professor in Bobo Dioulasso. He's earning it from his people. In Parliament, formerly skeptical lawmakers are lining up behind his development agenda. Ministries once weighed down by bureaucracy are now reporting record project completion rates. Transparency initiatives like live-streamed budget sessions for the canal have increased public participation and reduced suspicion. But perhaps most importantly, the canal has become a symbol of unity. In a country historically divided by ethnic tensions and geographic disparities, the canal cuts across all, physically and symbolically. It connects the arid north to the fertile south. It brings together Mossi farmers, Fulani herders, and urban youth under one shared infrastructure. For once, everyone has a stake in the same dream. And that may be Traoré's greatest accomplishment, not just building a canal, but building a shared future. From the fields to the assembly halls, from village elders to young digital activists, there is a single growing conviction: we did this and we can do more. For decades, the United States has positioned itself as a key partner in African development. Through agencies like USAID and support for multilateral organizations such as the IMF and World Bank, Washington has promoted a model based on loans, conditional aid, and institutional reform. But Burkina Faso's recent achievement challenges this approach. The Thomas Sankara Canal stands as a stark example of what many in Washington are quietly calling a paradigm shift. No longer is Africa seen solely as a recipient of aid. Instead, Burkina Faso shows what self-reliance can look like, and it's sending ripples through diplomatic circles. Some analysts warn that the country's refusal to engage with traditional lenders could isolate it politically and economically. They question the canal's sustainability without external financing and technical support. Yet, others in Washington recognize a deeper truth. The old model of development aid is losing legitimacy. Burkina Faso's ability to complete a major infrastructure project without IMF loans raises critical questions about the effectiveness of decades-long strategy. Are the conditions attached to aid fostering growth or dependency? From the US Congress to policy think tanks, discussions are emerging about reimagining African partnerships, emphasizing local expertise, sovereignty, and mutual respect over patronage. Still, there is caution. The political instability in the Sahel region, ongoing insurgencies, and governance challenges mean the US and its allies watch Burkina Faso closely. They want to support stability, but on terms that align with their interests. In this new landscape, the role of American diplomacy must evolve. Burkina Faso's Canal is not just infrastructure. It's a signal that African nations are ready to lead their futures with or without traditional Western support. Beyond Washington, the completion of Burkina Faso's Canal has caught the attention of powers worldwide, each weighing its geopolitical implications. In Europe, countries like France and Italy face a complex dilemma. France, historically the dominant power in Francophone Africa, has long relied on aid and military presence to maintain influence. The Canal's success without French backing challenges Paris's traditional role. While publicly congratulating Burkina Faso's achievement, French officials privately expressed concern over losing leverage in the Sahel. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's attendance at the inauguration signaled a subtle shift. Italy seeks to strengthen economic ties with African nations through infrastructure investments, attempting to present itself as a more flexible partner than France or the EU bureaucracy. The Canal's project could serve as a model for new African-European partnerships based on respect and mutual benefit. Meanwhile, China, a key player in African infrastructure, watches carefully. Beijing has funded massive projects across the continent through the Belt and Road Initiative, but Burkina Faso's self-financed approach may inspire other countries to question reliance on Chinese loans often tied to strategic concessions. Regionally, Burkina Faso's Canal bolsters its position within the economic community of West African states, ECOWAS. It demonstrates that local solutions to shared problems like water scarcity and food insecurity are viable and scalable. This may prompt neighboring countries to seek greater autonomy in development projects and reduce dependence on external financiers. The Canal's success also carries symbolic weight in the ongoing battle against extremist groups destabilizing the Sahel. A stronger, more self-reliant Burkina Faso could serve as a stabilizing force, offering economic alternatives to vulnerable populations and reducing the allure of insurgency. As the world watches, Burkina Faso is quietly reshaping the rules of engagement, asserting that African nations can and must be architects of their own destiny. What no one anticipated was how the Canal project would transform Ibrahim Traoré himself. From a military leader often dismissed by global powers into a symbol of African resilience and leadership. The world saw a country building a canal, but inside Burkina Faso, something far deeper was happening. Traoré was becoming an icon. His decision to reject the IMF's loans and conditions was seen abroad as reckless or risky. But at home, it ignited a wave of pride and hope. Suddenly, Traoré was no longer just a president. He was the embodiment of self-determination. This shift is more than symbolic. It translates into real political capital. Within months after the Canal's inauguration, polls showed a surge in Traoré's approval ratings, crossing historic highs. for any Burkinabe leader. His political opponents struggled to counter a narrative built on tangible achievement and national pride. On the international stage, his voice grew louder. Invitations came from regional bodies like ECOWAS and the African Union. He began speaking on panels about African sovereignty and sustainable development, topics previously dominated by more established figures. Even some Western diplomats started recalibrating their stance, acknowledging that Traoré represented a new generation of African leadership, one that demanded respect on its own terms, not charity. But this newfound stature came with risks. The balance of power within Burkina Faso's political and military elite began to shift, causing tension behind the scenes. Traoré's bold vision was inspiring, but not all were ready to embrace such rapid change. The Canal's success didn't just redefine Burkina Faso's infrastructure, it redefined Ibrahim Traoré's legacy. Internationally, he emerged as a beacon of African autonomy, often compared to legends like Thomas Sankara himself. His leadership style, rooted in pragmatism and bold nationalism, resonated deeply with a continent tired of external interference. This elevated status has given Traoré new leverage in diplomatic arenas, allowing him to push back against foreign pressures and advocate for policies centered on African priorities. But perhaps most importantly, within Burkina Faso, the Canal became a rallying point for national identity. Traoré's narrative of self-reliance inspired a generation to believe that true freedom isn't given, it's built. Block by block, canal by canal. Despite ongoing challenges, from security threats to economic hurdles, the Canal stands as a testament to what Burkina Faso can achieve when it controls its destiny. We did not inherit freedom, we took it, Traoré declared at a recent address. This message, amplified by the Canal's waters flowing across the nation, is more than politics. It's a movement, a new chapter in Africa's story, one where leaders like Ibrahim Traoré no longer ask for permission, but demand respect. And the world is finally taking notice. Burkina Faso's canal is more than an engineering marvel. It is a beacon of hope and a symbol of rebirth. From the parched fields of the Sahel to the bustling streets of Ouagadougou, this canal brings life, opportunity, and dignity. It is proof that when a nation stands united, driven by belief and hard work, nothing is impossible. President Ibrahim Traoré's vision has sparked a revolution, not just of infrastructure, but of spirit. His words echo across the continent. We did not ask for permission to be free. We stood up and took it. This story is far from over. Burkina Faso is writing a new chapter, one where Africans build their futures on their own terms. If the courage and determination of Ibrahim Traoré inspire you, share this story. Join us in amplifying the voices of a rising Africa. Subscribe to stay connected with stories that matter, where truth overpowers headlines and hope fuels change. Long live Burkina Faso, long live Africa,